Hi there, thanks for joining me. In this video, I'll show you how to do an Impressionist style painting using Corel Painter. And you can be using Corel Painter X3 or 12, either version works fine. And we'll go ahead and get started here. The canvas I'm using is 11 inches wide by 14 inches tall at 72 dpi. You could make your resolution a little bit higher if you want to, like 150 or 300. But for this example, we'll just do 72. I'll hide my title. So we have a pretty decent looking painting here. This is kind of my interpretation of a Claude Monet painting. I'm not going to specify which one, and it's not an exact duplicate, but I used it as a reference to try to show you this particular style and how you can accomplish it with Corel Painter. So what's important to note here is that I'm going for an Impressionist style, and what Impressionism is it's kind of really quick painting. A lot of these artists only had a certain amount of time to paint this scene because they didn't have cameras, so artists would go out to this particular location, take their paints and everything out there and try to paint it really quickly before the light changes. So you kind of have to capture a lot of detail in a very short period of time, but most of the detail is kind of implied. It's not very finely drawn detail, it's a lot of rough brush strokes that kind of give you the illusion of detail. Another thing that makes this look a little more accurate is this texture. I put multiple canvas textures on here, so this kind of makes it look more like paint. I tried to use very specific brush strokes and shapes, and kind of more or less tried to copy Monet's painting style here. It's pretty easy. There's not too many brushes that you need, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to hide my painting, and the first thing I did was I made a sketch, and again I kind of used a pre-existing painting as a reference, so I had an idea of what I was going to do, but I did my sketch here of where everything is basically laid out, and then it'll make it easier to follow. My sketch is on its own layer. I created a new layer for it in the layers palette, and this layer is on top of all the other layers. It might help sometimes to set your composite method to multiply, but always keep your sketch on top, that way you'll be able to see it. So we can go ahead and get started here. I'll start on the canvas layer, and we'll end up using multiple layers at some point, but for now we'll just start with the canvas. So what we want to do is to tone our canvas, and toning your canvas really just kind of helps all of your colors come together. And in this particular painting, it is kind of toned. And actually, I think it would probably be helpful if we could see this painting here while we're working on it. And one of the nice things about Painter X3 is that there's a reference palette feature. However, you don't necessarily need that, because as you can see, I can make my own reference palette. It's a little bit more of a hassle, but it works. So now we've got our reference palette, and we can see our whole painting here. So let's go ahead and tone the canvas. The overall tone, I think, is this kind of cream yellow color, so we'll go for something like that. And we use the paint bucket with current colors selected, and tap and fill. So now our canvas kind of has a tint and a tone. Now what I did is, rather than make a million brush strokes here, I kind of blocked in my color first, and then I went over it with a brush and kind of blended it more to make it look like brush strokes. So we'll use the airbrush, the digital airbrush, to block in most of our color. So I have this color set library open. I'm going to pull from this sometimes because it's got a lot of just basic paint colors. So we'll go with this green-blue here. Use a pretty big airbrush and just start blocking in color. I'm just kind of going by what I have in the painting here. Use another blue, some blue-green. Really doing this pretty fast because if you want to paint like an Impressionist, you have to not only copy visually what you see, but you have to kind of work quickly, because that's the way that they worked. So they didn't spend forever nitpicking and focusing on little details. They just kind of went for it and just put things in quickly and didn't worry about making mistakes. And that's kind of what defines Impressionism, or that particular style. So I'm really just kind of picking colors and throwing them in at random. Really just kind of doing this however I feel like doing it. Not really focusing on detail. Holding Alt on my keyboard to sample from colors that are already on the canvas. That can be helpful. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we'll go for something like that for now. The next thing that we'll do is we'll make a new layer, and let's call it, I'm assuming this is some kind of church or something, so we'll just call it church. This is on its own layer now, and we'll go ahead and make a multiply blend mode for this layer. And let's use the loaded palette knife. And I'm going to use color variability now and then. If you don't have color variability active, it's in the window menu. It's under brush control panels, all the way at the bottom, color variability. And this particular brush here will let us do some kind of palette knife looking things. We will use this indigo, this dark blue color here, and we'll just go ahead and rough in this tower shape and all of these shapes here. I'm going to try to keep that bottom line pretty straight, so maybe you want to avoid doing that first and just focus on the top stuff. And again, don't worry about everything being really sharp, because in the Impressionist style, these buildings aren't all drawn in. They're kind of implied with just rough shapes. So you want to try not to do anything that they weren't able to do if you want to match this style. And it's really kind of a fun way to paint, because it challenges you to try to express yourself with a limited set of tools here. Some kind of tower thing going on here. That'll work, and then we'll put in just kind of a little bit of dark color here towards the bottom. I think that will work. And maybe actually we'll put in some indications for the tower here. Now we'll go ahead and go back to the canvas layer, and we can continue blocking in color. Now, what's going to make this look like an Impressionist style painting is if there's a lot of different brush strokes, and rather than do them all individually one at a time, we can do several at a time by using the Impressionist brush, and that's located under the Artists category. And the secret to this is there's 2 or 3 settings that we're going to get depending on how we change the resaturation and the bleed and the opacity. So what I want you to do is we're going to set the blending functionality first. So we want the opacity to be at 100%, we want bleed to be at 0, and we want resaturation to be at 0. And when we do that and we use this brush, what it's going to do is it's just going to pick up whatever color you're currently on. So if I'm over here on the blue and I start painting, it's only going to paint with that blue until I let go. If I start painting on the orange, it's only going to paint with orange until I let go. So essentially what it's going to do is just kind of blend up our color. So what you want to do is you want to just kind of use up and down brush strokes in tight little areas. You don't really want to stray too far outside of where you're at. You can use a big brush or a small brush, whatever works. You want to just kind of be careful to not mix up your color too much. You want to do it just enough to where it just looks like brush strokes. In this particular painting that I'm copying, the Monet painting, there's a particular direction of brush strokes that he uses, and they kind of emanate from the center outwards in kind of a radial way. So I was kind of copying that here. you can use these brush strokes in different ways to imply different directions and things. So you get a lot of expression out of a simplified way of illustrating. Around here there's some trees, we'll block those in a little bit. On the water here, most of the brush strokes are horizontal. So he's using that to kind of imply a water texture. And then they kind of go sideways here when you get to this point, and that kind of helps establish perspective. I'm really kind of mixing everything up here as best I can. We'll go ahead and block in these trees here so we can do some additive stuff with this same Impressionist brush. We'll change the resaturation a little bit higher. Now, the higher we change this, the more color it's going to add. It's still going to blend a little bit, but it's going to add whatever color we have selected. So we'll use maybe a setting of 15, and we'll continue to add some more colors here. Block in these trees. And do a little bit of the background here. You can really just kind of do this however you want. You don't even have to copy anyone in particular. You can just kind of paint your own paintings based on different scenes. And this stuff's fun to do outside. I've gone to the park and gone to the lake and done Impressionist paintings just on the spot. You can bring your laptop, or if you have an iPad, you can do it on your iPad. It's really pretty fun. I'm in kind of a light area here. The trick is using a lot of different colors. And varying the colors a lot helps. In fact, sometimes the more color, the better. This particular painting, there's a really bright, vivid orange that helps everything stand out. So there's some of that in. And some more of the blue back in here. And we can always go through in the end and tweak some of these colors too if they're a little too bright or a little too vivid. I think this looks pretty good for now, so let's blend up our color a little bit more. We'll turn our resaturation back down to 0 so that we can just blend and blend in some of what we put in, following those same angles that we established before. I'm being kind of quick about this because I don't want this video to be super long. You can spend a little bit more time on it than I am getting it to look right. You don't have to be so rushed, but you do want to try to work kind of quickly. Not too quickly. So get something like that. Let's play around a little bit with our building here. Let's add some color to that. So we probably don't really need our sketch at this point. I think we have a pretty good idea of where everything's at. So let's hide that by turning off the little eyeball here. And let's merge our church layer with our canvas. So with the church layer selected, we will go to Layers and Drop. And now this has become a single layer. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can see the church. And we'll go ahead and add some color to it using the palette knife that we used before. So we'll put in a little bit of this teal color, which is in the original painting, in some different places. And I'm being intentionally sloppy, as I mentioned before. You want there to be a kind of style about this. I'm kind of implying where these different things are, but I'm not going to draw actual windows and roofs and these different things. I'm just going to kind of let you use your imagination and see them there yourself without having to draw them there literally. of brown stuff here. And then there's a lot of this kind of purple color. If you happen to know what painting this is, you can always go on Google Images and download a copy of it. I don't really want to specify too much about which painting this is or show it, because I know YouTube has some different copyright laws and things that I don't want to violate, so that's why I'm not showing the actual painting. And we'll take some colors from our church here, throw those in using the palette knife. And we can go ahead and blend some of this up. So we'll use this same Impressionist brush with the same setting for blending. We'll go through and blend up inside of here. Try not to really do the edges of the building, just try to do the inside, because if you do the edges, there's a good chance that you'll mess them up, and you want them to be pretty sharp. Yes, that's how they are in this painting. You have to have a good balance of sharp detail and rough detail. The next thing we'll do is we want to blend these edges up so they're not so sharp. We want to roughen them a little bit. So one way that we can do that is to use the coarse oily blender. And let's select a paper because it works with one of these paper textures that we choose. Let's use artist's canvas. And I think a setting like this will work, where the paper scale is pretty low, the paper contrast is right about here. And what this will do is it will let us blend and get this canvas texture, and that's what we want, because when you paint with oil on canvas, you pick up some of that texture. We want this to look like it's an oil painting. So I'm going to kind of smudge some of this around, smudge some of the edges. I'm going to pull them in a direction that kind of implies that there was a palette knife pulled down here. So again, I'm kind of copying my reference image. I'm just kind of pulling and smudging the paint to make it look a little more natural. Trying to do it just on the church here. Don't worry about doing it in the sky or on the water here just yet. I think that will work for now. Let's add a little bit more to our painting. So let's take the palette knife again, and let's add some of these white highlights in the water. We use kind of a very, very light, almost white cream color. We'll put in some little light spots kind of following these angles. Some kind of stuff up in here. Something like that. We could do that with some of these other colors too. Put in some little blue spots here and there. And there's these distinct kind of violet smudges here in the original painting, so we'll put those in. I get something like that. We might put a little bit over here. Maybe we'll mute it a little bit. Just add some more detail. We'll put some yellow in here. Like it needs a little more of that. And then let's go and blend it again using the Impressionist brush, again with this 0-0 setting. And we'll just kind of lightly go over some of this. Don't want to really over blend it because it'll go away. animate something like that. We're looking pretty good. Now, you can, again, as I mentioned, you can spend as much time as you want doing this. I'm not going to spend as much time as I did to get here. This took a little bit longer than this did because I'm being pretty quick. But we'll go ahead and jump forward to some of the last stuff. So one thing that we want to do is add some texture. So when you're done with all of your layers and things here, you can go ahead and just do a drop all to flatten everything down to a single layer. Now to add a texture, we want to put it on its own layer. So we create a new layer here. We'll call it texture. And the secret to this is we want this texture to appear over our painting, but we don't want to put it on the same layer as our painting, because if we decide that we're going to do anything else, smudge our painting around, we don't want to smudge our texture. So we want our texture to just be kind of there on its own without getting interrupted by anything else we do. So the secret to that is you want to pick a neutral gray color somewhere in this range here. You want your hue and your saturation to be at 0, but your value should have a number here. It should be somewhere kind of in the range of 120. We use the paint bucket with current color selected to fill our layer with this gray. Then we'll change our composite method to overlay. Now the trick here is that when you turn this eyeball on and off, you want your image to change minimally. If it's getting lighter or darker by a lot, then you need to pick a lighter or darker gray color. In this case, I don't see it changing too much, so I'm fine with this. What this is doing is this is essentially going to make everything that's gray invisible and make everything that's white and black appear normally. So when we add this texture, which is pretty much just white and black and gray, you're only going to see the texture. So we will go ahead and go with this texture that we have here selected, and we'll go to Effects and Surface Control, Apply Surface Texture. And we can see in our little dialog what we're going to get. If you like how this looks, that's fine. If not, you might need to change your amount because you don't want it to be too strong like this. You want it to be a little more subtle. I'll go with something like that. I wouldn't really touch any of these other settings for now. Just go to OK. And you can see that we get some texture. I'm going to zoom in so we can see. Now we don't want our texture to be so uniform because that does not look realistic at all. So to kind of tone down our texture a little bit, we're going to add a mask, and that'll let us temporarily erase some of the pixels here. So we'll create a new layer mask, make sure the mask is selected by clicking on it here, and we'll take black, and we'll take the custom sponge, and we'll go ahead and paint over this. Now as we paint over it, it's going to conceal some of this texture. So I'll do it in a couple spots, and then as you can see when we zoom in now, that texture isn't everywhere. It's just in a couple spots, so it really kind of breaks it up and helps it look more natural. Now it's also good to use more than one texture sometimes. So let's create another layer, do the same as we did last time by picking this neutral gray color here, fill the canvas, change the composite method to overlay, and we'll pick a different paper. This time we'll use Italian watercolor paper with these settings here. We'll go to Effects, Surface Control, Apply Surface Texture. We get another texture here. We'll go to OK. And now we have more texture. As you can see, this looks a little more sandy, but we want to do that same thing where we add a new layer mask. Click inside the mask, take black, use the sponge. It's got kind of a setting of 49 here, so you don't want the sponge to be at 100% or too low. And we'll use the sponge to paint away some of this texture. And then we can zoom in and we can see what we have. Looks pretty good. Looks like a more natural texture now. So now we've made it kind of look like more realistic paint. Now the last thing that we'll do is we'll just kind of tweak the colors a little bit so they match a little bit better and look a little more real. This painting now has been weathered a little bit, so it's kind of yellowed and kind of looks a little more old. So if we want our painting to look the same, we're going to need to yellow it a little bit. So we'll add a new layer, make it a multiply blend mode, take the paint bucket, and we'll take a kind of light cream color here, and we'll just tap to fill our canvas with yellow. Now we've tinted it a little bit yellow. We can change the opacity slider here to tone it down a little bit, so I don't want it to be too dark. And then finally, let's go ahead and do another drop all. And let's do a select all from the select menu. We'll do an edit, copy, and an edit, paste in place. So we've duplicated our canvas here. And for this duplicate, we're going to do some effects settings here to this. So let's go to tonal control and brightness and contrast. Now, if your brightness and contrast need to be improved, go ahead and do this. If not, you don't really need to mess with it. But I feel like in this case, I want to kind of play with these settings. So I'm going to play with my contrast a little bit. Maybe play with my brightness. Try to get a setting that I think I like. I like something like that better. So this is before, this is after. It just kind of made it a little bit darker and helped it to kind of match my example here. This painting that I'm basing my example off of is kind of dark. It's a night scene, so we don't want it to be too bright. Now, the reason why we put the texture on its own layer is because you may want to go through and change some things. If we go back to our canvas layer here, let's smudge it around a little bit. We'll do an extreme example. See how I can smudge my canvas, or my paint that's on my canvas, but this texture remains intact? If we were to do, oops, I've ruined my painting here, that's okay. If we were to do a drop all and flatten all our layers, these texture layers are now gone. They're still here visually, but now if we do something like smudging, we're going to smudge our texture. See how the texture goes away when we blend? That's why we have this texture on its own layer, because it's independent of the artwork. If we turn them both off, no more texture. We turn them back on, texture's back. So that's very important, because normally when you apply a texture to your painting, you're applying it to whichever layer is active. And if you're only painting on a single layer and you apply your texture and then you paint some more, you're going to paint over your texture or smudge your texture or erase your texture, and you don't want to do that. So texture is something that you should add towards the end, and it should always be on its own layer using the method I described here. Hopefully this has helped you to get a grasp for how to do Impressionist style paintings using Corel Painter. If you found this information helpful, take a quick second to like this video or share it on YouTube or Facebook, and that'll make it easier for other artists out there to find this information. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for my next video.